and welcome to today's video. In today's video I want to talk about some of the equipment that we need as knitters and some of the equipment we can probably do without. I'm sure, like me, you like buying notions and tools and different things that make your knitting life more enjoyable. But do we really need all these things? Times are hard. It's not just the UK that are going through a cost of living crisis. I think most of the world is probably. So do we really need all the things that we keep buying to make our knitting more enjoyable? Well, I'm going to chat about my views on this topic in today's video. If you're new here, my name is Anniken. I design knitting patterns, I teach knitting workshops online and in person, and I sell yarn through our website YarnAddict.co.uk. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. I quite like buying various types of knitting tools. I try and restrict my yarn purchase. Do I really? I try and restrict my yarn purchase. I don't do a very good job of it. I've just been having a really big clear out, July. I'm filming this on the 1st of August. It probably won't go out till later in August. But in July, I've been having a big clear out of my office, and I have gotten rid of probably over 30 knitting and crochet books, loads and loads of yarn, maybe like a third of my yarn stash, loads of leftover yarn, which I think is a different matter, and also going through other stuff and trying to decide what I actually need to keep, because my office is just not big enough for all the stuff I have. Apologies if my camera position has changed. I've moved things now. I can't get my camera in the right position. So the only things that we really need for knitting is needles and yarn. You don't really need anything else. You kind of need a sewing needle and pair of scissors, but really yarn and needles is all you need. But within that there is a lot of choice. There's also a lot of other gadgets and equipment and tools and things that we're being sold as knitters that we may or may not need. So let's have a chat about this today. Do share your views on this in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think of this as well. So let's start with needles, because we do need needles to knit. I mean, you can finger knit, but it's not the same as knitting with needles. So let's talk about needles. There are very basic cheap needles you can get. Are they the most enjoyable to use? Probably not. I started off in the 80s using whatever my mum, knitting needles my mum had, or if she didn't have the right size, whatever they sold in our local yarn shop. I mainly knitted on circular needles, and then I had a break from knitting for a while in the kind of late 90s, second half of the 90s, and then I got back into knitting again in the 2000s, early 2000s, and or mid 2000s. Yeah, mid 2000s, probably late 2000s. I don't know, a long time ago. And I just bought whatever needles they sold in my local wool shop, and they weren't great needles, to be quite honest. And then I discovered my first set of interchangeable needles. I've always preferred circular needles because that's the most commonly used needles in Norway when I was growing up and when I was a teenager. So I was always drawn to circular needles, but I discovered interchangeable needles, and I bought this set from the States. I can't remember what they're called, and they were just absolutely useless, and they probably weren't that cheap either. They were useless, and eventually I got rid of them because they were just hopeless. And then I discovered what went on to become Knit Pro, and I bought one of their interchangeable sets, and of course I bought a full set. I then added loads of extra bits to that over the years. I then discovered ChowGoo needles, and I bought loads of their straight circular needles, or their not straight circulars, fixed circular needles, because I really liked them. Then they bought an interchangeable set, then I bought the interchangeable set. And when I bought the interchangeable set of ChowGoos, it came in 3 options. You could have just the smaller sizes, just the bigger sizes, or all the sizes. And I, by that point, knew that I only really used the smaller half, so up to 5mm needles. I rarely go above 5mm needles. But because I was doing this as a job by then, and I thought I need all the needles, so I bought the whole set. So even though I knew that I probably wouldn't use the biggest sizes, I still bought the whole set, which was quite expensive, but it was a work expense for me. And then since then I've discovered other needles. I've tried different types of Knit Pro needles, their Mindful collection, their oh, what are they called? Carbons, and a few other different Nipro needles. I've tried Licker, which I really like, although a little bit blunt. I've recently discovered Lantern Moon. I only have one set of tips in their needles at the moment, but I think I will get some more because they're wooden. I think they are really good for traveling. I can see myself using them a lot when I travel by plane, so I don't have to worry about taking metal needles. Although I do take metal needles on the plane. I've been traveling with my Chow metal circular needles for years, probably 15 years now, and I've never had a problem. But I do think wooden needles are probably safer if you are going to get questioned about your needles. Needles are really, really cheap, basic needles that, to be quite honest, I don't think are that good and I probably wouldn't use unless I had to. And right up to really expensive ones. There was an American brand which I think have closed down now. They were called Signature, and I bought a set of their double pointed needles many, many years ago, and one set of straight needles. Not sure why, because I never use straight needles. And I really like them, and I always wanted to get some of their circular needles, but because they weren't available in the UK and I had to order them from the US, it was just too expensive. But they were like the Rolls Royce of knitting needles. So knitting needles come from very, very cheap to very, very expensive. Do you need all of them? Probably not. I do think it's a good idea to have knitting needles made of different materials, because depending on what yarn you're knitting with, some yarn might be better on wooden needles, some might be better on metal needles. It's also worth trying different needles to see what you prefer to knit with. I really like metal because they make it really fast to knit, but some people probably find them a bit too slippery. I also like really pointy needles, but some people don't like pointy needles. So before you go and invest in a set of expensive interchangeable needles that have all the sizes you will ever need, maybe see if you can borrow somebody from a friend and see what they like, or see if you can try some out in the yarn shop or at a show, or at least look at them and see what they look like. And instead of buying the whole set, buy just the sizes you need. If you mainly knit with 2 or 3 sizes, it's pointless buying the whole set just in case. Just buy the sizes you need the most. Some brands like Chow, I assume they still do this, they will split it into smaller packs, so you can buy just 2 or 3 sizes or 4 or 5 sizes or whatever. Or you can just start off buying, say if you mainly use 4mm needles, buy 4mm tips and a cable, and then add to it as you can afford it. You don't have to save up and buy the whole set in one go. It probably is cheaper to buy all the sizes in one go, but only if you're going to use them. If you're not going to use 90% of the needle tips in your set, then it's not cheaper to buy the whole set. Just buy them as you go and build up your own set. That will probably be cheaper for most of us in the long run. The other thing which I'm very guilty of is project bags. So I have a little bit of a handbag obsession. I like handbags, I like project bags, I like tote bags, I like all kinds of bags. And in my July clear out, I've actually cleared out a lot of project bags. You see these IKEA units, so a box that goes this kind of size. I had 2 of those full of project bags, and zipped pouches and makeup pouches and little pouches and bigger pouches and all that kind of stuff, and I've cleared it all off and got it into like a normal size single drawer. I've put a lot of it on my website, a lot of it is sold already. At the point of filming this, I still have a lot of books, yarn, project bags, fabric in the de-stash section on my website, so if you haven't checked it out, do check it out. I think I said this at the beginning, but I'm not sure when this video is going out. Probably not till the second half of August, maybe even early September. So there may not be any left by then, but there probably will be, I expect. So I have been clearing out a lot of project bags, because the thing is, the project bags I liked when I first started buying project bags, probably nearly 20 years ago, 15 years ago, they're not necessarily the project bags I like now. Before you buy project bags, think about whether you really need them. So in the 80s, when I was a teenager, yes, I'm that old, and I was knitting, I used to just use a carrier bag. So when I went to the yarn shop and bought the yarn for a sweater I wanted to knit, they would normally give me a carrier bag for the yarn, and I would use that bag as a project bag. And I must admit, I don't really like carrier bags. So when I discovered that you could get things like project bags, I was like, oh, that's exciting. And I especially like drawstring ones or zip ones, things that kept my knitting under control. It stopped it falling out and dogs and kids getting into it and that kind of thing. And then over the years, I bought more and more and more. Do we need all these project bags? Probably not. My fanciest project bag is this one, which I love, from Hohe and Co. It is leather, it's from Argentina, it's handmade, I guess, or made by a small business in Argentina. It is absolutely beautiful and I love it, and I've used it a lot since I got it about 6 months ago. But do you need to spend that much money on a project bag and buy fancy project bags like that? No, you don't. When I go to Norway, there is a shop called Normal, and it's a shop that sells makeup, skincare, cleaning products, toiletries, things like that. And when I first realized that this shop existed, because it wasn't there when I was living in Norway in the 80s, 70s and 80s, because of what they sell, I thought Normal was a weird name for a shop. It means the same in Norwegian as it does in English. And I thought it kind of meant that you were buying stuff to make you look normal. But their ad is something like normal stuff to normal prices or something, or normal stuff at low prices, kind of like the everyday stuff you need. But they do two types of reusable bags, and every time I go to Norway I usually pop in there to get some toiletries, because I stay with my parents. I keep a set of toiletries and skincare and stuff in Norway now, so I don't have to drag it with me every time, and I usually pop in there to get it because where my parents live, it's the easiest place to get everything I want. And they do two size project bags, two size tote bags or shopping bags. They do this size, and then they do like a large tote bag. And this is not like cotton or anything, some weird material, but it just lasts quite a long time. All the knitting needles can poke through them. So I got one of these last time I was in Norway, and I think I left it at my parents to use it as a project bag when I'm there. And then I also got one that I brought home with me, and I was using this for the project I was working on my last trip to Norway, which was this. It's supposed to be a clutch bag, but I haven't finished it yet. And I used that as a project bag and it worked perfectly well. The problem is this kind of bag is that, especially a small one, is that things do fall out easily. So when I was taking it home with me in my backpack, I had to kind of like fold it over just to make sure things didn't fall out all over my backpack. So you don't need fancy project bags. You probably have a cupboard or at least a drawer full of reusable bags. The ones you get at the supermarket probably aren't that good because they tend to be quite big. But if you're like me, when you go to yarn shows, they sell tote bags with their own branding. Some yarn sellers, businesses at yarn shows will give you a tote bag if you spend over a certain amount. You go into a yarn shop, sometimes they'll give you a tote bag if you spend enough money. I have loads and loads of tote bags, and I could easily, especially if it's a sweater project, I could easily put in one of those. But I do like having a dedicated project bag, and I do like sometimes matching my project bags to my nails or my project. So if I'm doing a project that is pink and purple, I try and choose one of my pink or purple project bags. And sometimes I want a small project bag, sometimes I want a bigger project bag, sometimes I want a drawstring, sometimes I want a zip, sometimes I want a really, really fancy one. And I do have a review on this, by the way, which I'll link below. But the thing I like about this is because I can just sit it on the floor next to my chair and knit straight out of it. And I found that quite easy and convenient. So I do like that one. And for me, it was worth the money. But you don't really need to buy this very, very expensive stuff. So project bags, they're nice to have. And if you're a project bag maker, I'm very, very tempted, and I like buying project bags, but you don't really need it. Knitting notions. Knitting notions comes in all price ranges, from very, very basic to very, very expensive. There are some notions brands that do very nice stuff, but scissors are scissors. Yes, they may vary in the sharpness. For example, you want to make sure you've got scissors that can actually cut the yarn, and I have had some that don't. Sewing needles, tapestry needles, you can get really, really cheap basic ones, or you can get very, very expensive ones made from different types of wood and all kinds of stuff. and they're not necessarily that much better. The main thing is that you find some sewing needles and scissors and things that you like and you enjoy working with, especially if you're going to sew up like a whole garment. But you don't need to buy the most expensive, trendiest brands available that all the knitfluencers, which are knitting influencers, are using. Obviously, if you like that and you can afford it, then go for it. But don't feel like you have to buy these fancy brands just because everyone on Instagram and TikTok are using them. Basic sewing needle and scissors from your local haberdashery shop or fabric shop or yarn shop or whatever will do just fine. The other things are things like stitch markers, progress markers, all that kind of stuff. I really like them and I have quite a few of them. I have over the years realized that I don't really like the fancy handmade stitch markers because they quite often have bits that catch on my knitting. When it comes to stitch markers, the main thing for me is that the bit that hangs off my needle is a solid ring, and some of the handmade ones have like a little gap in them because they open the wire up, put beads and things on, close them up, and if it has a gap, your yarn will get caught in there at some point, especially if you knit with thinner yarn. So I will not buy stitch markers that don't have a solid ring that you put on your needles. I do have the progress markers so you can kind of open up. I should have brought some up with me to show you. And I do quite often use those to mark different points of my knitting. But you can use things like safety pins. So in the 80s, I used to knit a lot of sweaters in the round and we used to use safety pins. I'd put one between the stitches at the beginning of the round. Every few rows, I'd move them up. So you don't really need fancy stitch markers, although I do find them very useful and I do have a variety of different ones. But at the same time, most yarn shops have a basic range that you can buy. You do not need to buy the fancy color coordinated ones, although I do have some of those because I do like them. But if you can afford it and you want to spend your money on that, that's fine. But if you don't and you're feeling bad because you can't afford the expensive ones, I'm trying to be very careful not to name brands here apart from the Ho-He bag, which I do really like. I try not to name brands, but I will link a video below where I talk about my essential knitting kit and the kind of tools and notions that I like to have in my knitting kit. But there's always cheaper versions available if you need to stick to a budget. The next thing, which is probably a bit more recent, are things called barber cords. So this is actually a pack I haven't even opened yet. I've opened the pack now, but I can't get one now because they're all tangled up. So these are kind of, I don't know whether you can see that, they're kind of hollow tubes. They come, let me see if I can get, oh yeah, got it out. They are longish. I don't know how long they are. A meter? No, probably a bit longer than a meter. I don't know, but they're hollow tubes, and I first discovered them probably like 3 or 4 years ago. I saw a yarn shop in London. They sold a really nice pretty tin with their branding on it, and then I think there were 3 of these and then a couple of kind of clippy things so you can put on the end to stop them falling off the end, stitches falling off the end, although you can just tie a knot in it. And I bought one and I really liked them, and then I went to Norway, and one of the yarn companies in Norway sell them in big packs like that. So these are the thicker ones which are suitable for bigger needles, and the reason I hadn't opened the pack is because I haven't used them. And then I have a couple of packs of the smaller ones which are thinner, which are more suitable for thinner needles. The good thing with these is that you can get your needles, push these onto the tip, and then you can slide your stitches onto this barber cord, take your needle out if you need your needle for something else, or if you want to try it on or measure it or block it before you finish it, or whatever you want to do. I find them really useful and I use them a lot. If you use interchangeable needles, you can just screw the needle tips off and put your end stoppers on. They usually come with your interchangeable cables, but I don't always like doing that, especially if stuff is going to be on hold for a while. I do prefer to put them on barber cords. You can also just use waste yarn, sewing needle, waste yarn, thread it through all the stitches on your needle, pull your needle out, do what you need to do, and then put them back on the needle. But that's a bit more time consuming. So I do like these barber cords, but I only discovered them, like I said, 3 or 4 years ago, and I have been knitting since I was a child. So I've been knitting for many, many years without these, and I did just fine. Now I have discovered these, I can't live without them. But do you need them? Not really. You can do fine without them, but yeah, they're useful. but also see where you can get them cheaper. So a lot of, here in the UK, a lot of yarn shops and indie dyers do sell them. They usually comes in tins, so like 2 or 3 of them maybe, pretty colours, all that kind of stuff, but there probably are cheaper options. Like I said, Sunless Garn, I think it is. Yeah, Sunless Garn in Norway sell them in packs like this, big packs. Most yarn shops in Norway sell them, I think. I haven't seen anything like that here, which kind of surprises me a bit. Most of the people I've seen selling them here are indie dyers in the UK or some slightly more kind of fancier yarn shops. And yeah, they're useful, but you can live without them if you have to. Things like ball winders and swifts. I didn't have a ball winder when I was growing up. Most of the yarn we used to buy was in balls, I think, but occasionally my mum would buy ball in hanks or skeins, and me or my sister or my dad, one of us would sit with the yarn on our hands. Or if my mum was really clever, she would get one of us to sit with the yarn on the hands, the other one to ball it up, and then she could carry on knitting. But we did it between me, my sister, my dad, and my mum. There was somebody available to sit and hold the yarn. When I first got back into knitting, I remember buying this really big skein of lace weight yarn. It was an American yarn company. I can't remember what it was. It was a very big skein. I have a feeling it was like 200 grams. So there was like probably like 2,000 meters on this thing. It was huge. And I didn't have a ball winder or swift. In fact, I don't even think I knew what they were. I also had youngish children at the time. They were probably late primary school. So getting them to sit and hold it wasn't going to work. And my husband worked all day, and he probably also didn't really want to sit and hold it for 2 hours in the evening. So I put it on the back of a chair and started winding. I stood there winding for half an hour. I had a tiny little ball like that, put it down. Next day, went back and did some more. In the end, I gave up, and I don't think I ever did anything with that skein because winding all these meterage was just so tedious. So when I discovered yarn swifts and ball winders, I did buy a set, and I have probably had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Probably have 5 different swifts over the years. At the moment, I have one from Knit Pro and one from Belinda at the Knitting Hotel. I've done reviews on both of those, and the Knit Pro review also reviews the Knit Pro ball winder, and I also give you a demonstration on how a swift and ball winder works. And then I have a separate video on the Knitting Hotel swift that I got from Belinda. And the reason I got that one, which I cover in that video, I think, is because it's freestanding and it's much smaller and compact, and I really do like it, using it. That's a handmade one from India. Belinda has a contact in India that she buys it from. I used to have one, I still probably have it somewhere, that I bought many years ago. It was the first swift I bought. It was somebody I got to know in a knitting forum. Her or her husband, one of them made them. They were handmade in the UK. I used that for years. Then I bought a really cheap, nasty metal one off Amazon, which I didn't use very long because it was just horrible. And then I had a big standing one, which was really a skein winder, as in winding yarn from cones onto big skeins so I could hand dye it. And that was really big. And when I stopped hand dyeing, I got rid of that because it just took up too much space. Ball winder. If you were going to choose between a ball winder and swift, I would get a swift because you can't use a ball winder without a swift very easily. So you can put yarn on a swift and wind it by hand. I've done that before. Or you can put the yarn on the swift. Swift basically holds your yarn for you, and then you can use a ball winder to wind it, and that is much easier and quicker. I've had 3, I think: a basic plasticky one, a electric one which is still on the edge of my desk, which I need to get rid of because it hasn't worked for years and I can't be bothered to try and get it fixed, and I'm not replacing it because they're quite expensive and I don't really need it now. I don't wind enough yarn. When I used to hand out yarn, I used to offer to wind yarn for customers, and if I had to wind 2 or 3 lace weight skeins for an order, that could take me like a couple of hours if I did it on a manual ball winder. With the electric one, I could wind 12 meters of lace weight yarn in like, say, 10 minutes, as opposed to like half an hour plus if I did it on the regular ball winder. At the moment, I use the Knit Pro one, which is a lot bigger and bulkier, and that's the thing I don't like about it, but I do like it. It does work quite well. So ball winder and swift is nice to have, but you can certainly knit without it. You could also never buy yarn in hanks like this. Although, especially with hand-dyed yarn, I like seeing it like this because you can see all the colours that are involved in the yarn. If it's wound up, you can't necessarily see the colours. So I do like it like that. Life is a lot easier if you have a ball wound and swift. If you're going to choose between the two, buy a swift first. Check out whether you can buy one second hand. It's probably the kind of thing that people buy and then don't use because, or they want to get rid of because it takes up too much space. But it is certainly something you can knit without quite happily. Blocking equipment. So I am a lace knitter. I do a lot of lace knitting, and I do think for lace knitting especially, blocking is desirable. I think for most knitting, your knitting will probably benefit from being blocked. Is blocking absolutely essential? Probably not. Some form of blocking probably is, but that could be steam mining, for example, which is also a form of blocking. When we think about blocking, we think about soaking our knitting, stretching it out on a blocking board and pinning it in place, which is what you would do with lace knitting, and other types of knitting like color work and brioche and things also can benefit from that kind of treatment. And so can stocking stitch. I got a sweater downstairs at the moment. It's mainly stocking stitch with color work on the yoke. It's knitted in a yarn that doesn't knit up very smoothly because of the way it's spun. So I'm going to block it because I know that will transform the fabric and make it look much more even. I do have loads of videos on my website. If you go to YarnAddict.co.uk and click on tutorials, yeah, I think it's tutorials and workshops or something. There's a list there of blocking videos. There's loads on my YouTube channels, but if you want to find them easier, it's probably easier to go to my website and just scroll down to see blocking videos and then click on one and you can see what equipment I use. So I have blocking mats. These are these square foam rubbery mats. Mine are Knit Pro. You can buy them quite cheaply from eBay, maybe Amazon, I'm not sure, but definitely on eBay. I can't remember now what you search for, but my dog trainer had them when she has puppies. She puts them in she's got this like huge shed, small barn thing, and she puts an area there where she fences off, and she puts it on the floor there for the puppies to run around on. You can buy them quite often, buy them in hardware shops. You can get ones with like letter cutouts in them for children, like puzzle things. My mum's got some of those, so she got in the local toy shop. So there's various options, and a lot of them are a lot cheaper than the ones that the yarn companies sell. And when I'm going to replace mine, I am going to buy ones that are cheaper than the ones that Knit Pro sell. It's a good idea to get as many as you need in one go, and you'll probably need more than you think you will need, because I had, I think, 2 or 3 sets of the Knit Pro ones, and then I decided I could do it another set because occasionally I have very big shawls that need blocking and I will run out. And I ordered another Knit Pro set, didn't check the measurements, and I noticed that they've changed the measurements and they're slightly bigger than they used to be. I noticed the colour had changed, so I still got that pack. So I either check if Knit Pro still do the same ones and buy a couple of packs to match it and get rid of my old ones, or I sell them and buy new ones that are not Knit Pro. I haven't decided yet. First set of blocking mats I got from the States. They were cream with like fabric-y type sort of, yeah, like a fabric-y type cover. Not fabric, but it was softer than, it wasn't kind of the rubbery plasticky coating, foamy coating the Knit Pro ones have. And they're very nice, but they got dirty very quickly, and eventually I got rid of them because they just looked so dirty. Knitting blocking wires are very useful, especially if you're blocking lace. Blocking pins work better than regular sewing pins because they're thicker, so they're much easier to use. The regular sewing pins I find can bend a bit when you stretch your knitting, which you will do if you're doing lace knitting. Knit Pro do these things called knit blockers, which I do use a lot, especially for curved edges where I don't like using blocking wires, but I managed without them for quite a few years. So watch my blocking videos if you're interested in any kind of blocking information and what I use and what I recommend. If I have a video where I talk about different types of blocking methods and equipment, I will link below, but I can't remember whether I have such a video or not. Let me know what you think about knitting equipment and what you feel is essential for you and what you feel is worth investing money in versus what you bought that you thought were a waste of time. Let me know in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. And I'll see you next time.